So when I started working at Dieu Donné, you know, everything was fairly new to me, like having to learn how to beat, you know, the different fibers, the linen or the cotton. I really like dancing with the elements. Papermaking is so hard to control. Sometimes you're battling with it. It's an interesting way of interacting with materials, and I enjoy that. I want to start out showing you the kind of work that I was doing. This was my MFA show. So a lot of the pieces, elements are printed lithographically on all kinds of materials like metallic, mylar, film, Japanese papers, cloth, and whatnot. And I collaged a lot of paper printed elements on objects. So to the left, you can see a work that's kind of inspired by Jasper Johns. Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg were kind of big influences on my work at the time. So I printed a lot of elements on stone or metal, aluminum plates. So some of the work is photographically done, and then I would construct these. These were not so much additioned; they were more unique pieces. I might have done 3 of these, so it actually wasn't. It was kind of a loose addition. And the black and white elements are actually cast paper, which I started using or fabricating from being inspired by people like Joe Wilfer, who was in the community. He had a huge interest in hand papermaking, and he had his own papermaking studio on his farm. So he would invite me to come out and putter around and make things. And then the next year, I stayed in Madison after I had graduated, and I continued to work in the litho lab. But I also was working and making things at Joe's. So some of these elements are sculptural, cast paper pieces, almost like pieces of wood, but they're actually paper. And these are also cast paper pieces. So I was doing a lot of constructing. I was using bamboo and reeds and whatnot to create kind of an armature that the printed elements would be attached to. So by the time I ended up in New York, this was my first show at Condessa Lawler Gallery, which was in Chelsea at the time. This was 1980. From working at Dieu Donné, I had the availability of using materials and the shop, so I was able to make these fairly large constructed works that are, but then I would form the like linen and cotton paper pulps onto these armatures, so they would be integrally a part of the sculpture. And then while the body of the work is wet, I used pigmented linen pulps to paint the surfaces of the parts and pieces that I would sometimes construct into another more sculptural piece. But it wasn't until 1996 when Dieu Donné had its 20th anniversary that they invited me to mount a show in the gallery at Dieu Donné. This was at Broome Street when it was located there. So I did kind of an installation again. But I really, at that point, really kind of thought about my work and who I was at the time. And I really realized that I had lost my whole culture because I had grown up in Fargo, North Dakota, and my parents totally assimilated into a very white American community. So I never really had any contact with Chinese culture. So, I was always kind of tangentially addressing that, but it wasn't until this show where I really kind of researched Chinese art and history and culture and religion, and really kind of mounted this show, which is called 1 Billion Ghosts. And so the wallpaper is created with, I went to Chinatown and bought up all the Chinese joss paper that I could find. And if you're familiar with joss paper, it's all these packets and actual paper objects that people buy, and they burn them at the gravesite for their ancestors. So in a way, you're kind of like transmuting prayers and good wishes and wealth. Some of it is in the form of money and objects like anything from TVs to computers to cigarettes to, any object that the deceased would, in their own life would want in the afterlife. So anyway, that notion of being interested in the afterlife through Chinese culture really kind of like pervaded what I was really trying to focus on. So in a way, this installation kind of is almost like a Chinese household. Like in the case, there's Chinese medicine that I bought from stores in Chinatown, so it's almost like the medicine cabinet of the house. So this is when I really started doing a technique that I just kind of stumbled upon. Like I used to be a printmaker, of course, and I always look for the most economic of means. So in order to kind of address specific imagery, I always like collect images, like photographic images, and have a whole inventory of images. So I was buying books on China left and right, and lifting images and putting them together to make some sort of statement. So in order to incorporate these images, I started using solvent, and I transferred the images with lacquer thinner, and just by rubbing the back of Xeroxes to transfer the image onto the paper. So that sort of like began a whole body of work utilizing. This is sort of the bedroom of the installation. On the wall are cast bowls with little images of people, Chinese people that are in them, and then there's pillows, and then the bed has all these kind of translucent Gampi bowls. And this led to a bigger exhibition that I did at the Neuberger Museum. So I decided to do a piece that kind of addressed the afterlife. And what I did was I kind of, in a way, gathered objects that would represent a Chinese peasant on one side of a curtain that I created, and on the other side was objects that would represent a Chinese emperor. So I was trying to like address, is there like class differences in the afterlife? So a lot of these objects, this is like a steamer, but it has like these silver paper ingots that you can buy in Chinatown and burn. So again, it's like this representation of wealth. And so I, just gathered all kinds of objects, and I did laminate casting. So I was using an overbeaten abaca pulp to laminate cast over objects. So the object is still there in all of these pieces. It's inside, except for the vest. The vest is hand constructed. But everything else is, again, I'm going to Goodwill or the flea market and finding objects that would be incorporated. This is the emperor's side. And there was also two other artists. You can see this huge pile of toilet paper that was Susan Stockwell's art, which was kind of, so it was like a third and a third and a third of the room. So again, I'm using like the soldiers or the army with the shoes and the heads of the soldiers, and then the objects that represent, like I had someone sew a Chinese court robe out of paper. So that's what you see on the mannequin to the right. So that's like a Qing dynasty design. The emperor's throne. The emperor's the boots, but they're actually just transfers that are hanging off of a metal stand. And the emperor's bed. So I transferred all these images on the inside of the curtain. This is kind of going back a little bit. This is 1996. I did, at Art in General, they have a window that is displayed to the sidewalk. And Art in General is kind of close to Chinatown. So I decided to do this window display that was like a Chinese doctor. So I kind of, again, gathered all these different objects that I felt represented a Chinese doctor. And in a way, like throughout the number of installations that I've done over the years, I have tended to utilize elements from previous installations and recontextualize them into new ones. So you might see like different elements like being repeated here and there. This is a piece that I did at Henry Street Settlement, and each artist had this really small, tight, narrow little space to work in. So I felt that in a way it was almost like a prison cell. And so I decided to do this scenario of, like, say, a writer who was maybe a political writer imprisoned. And so in a way he has, but it's like, in a way, representative of the hereafter. So the piece is called Ghost Writer, and coming out of the typewriter is the character for heaven, but it's through all the different archaic to more modern Chinese characters. So I took a vintage typewriter and I covered it with abaca, and I used Chinese characters and I glued them onto the keys and stuff. And the cigarettes are cigarettes that you can buy in Chinatown as Jaws paper, as well as the beer cans and bottles and stuff. But everything's covered in abaca. Then a couple years, well, this is more like 2000, there was a paper show at Rutgers University that they curated that was really highlighting, like, very, the master hand paper-making artists in the field, which was all centered around Douglas Howe. And then there were other artists like Golda Lewis and Lawrence Barker and so on. And they gave me my own room off the main galleries. It sort of like you'd go along a corridor, and they gave me this room. So I decided to do something that counterbalanced the rest of the show. And I named it Reorient, and it basically is because papermaking was invented in China. I was, in a way, referencing Asian papermaking through my own work, and so I decided to do like the 4 cardinal directions with the specific color that's designated for each direction and animal. And this is one of the pieces. So I did all of the work is basically partially burnt Joss paper that's embedded in abaca, and then with the Xerox solvent transfers of the different animals. And then I also was in another, which was a year-long curated program at SEPA Gallery in Buffalo. And it was, again, all these Asian, from all kinds of different countries. And they gave me, if you are familiar with SEPA, they have kind of a main gallery, and the gallery is in like a shopping mall that's kind of a restored old building in downtown Buffalo. So some of the storefronts in the main kind of atrium area were empty. So they gave me one of these little storefronts. So I decided to kind of make a show about my father and my father's story, coming to America and moving to Fargo, North Dakota. And he he grew up in the back of a Chinese restaurant, the Fargo Cafe, and basically, he grew up and when the war broke out, he enlisted. After the war, he went back to China and found my mother as an arranged marriage. So he and one of my mother's relatives arranged the marriage. So brought her back as a GI bride and went back to Fargo. So in a way, and then he started his own restaurants there. So this whole little kind of installation is a whole reference to my father's story and my story as well. So I took a lot of photographs from family albums and again transferred them, so they were almost like photo album pages on the wall. And strangely enough, like in 2004, I had gone back to Fargo, for another show or that some friends had put together. And I ended up meeting the director of the Plains Museum, which is a very new, small museum that was built in Fargo. I showed him my work and he really was enthralled with this show about Fargo, about my father. So he wanted me to bring the show there. And of course, it was this tiny little room that I had created. And so I had to fill a space that is probably the size of the studio. So I had a postcard, an old postcard that I had kept for years and years of the Fargo Cafe, which was where my father literally grew up in the back of. And so I had that image blown up and printed on, those plastic curtains that you walk through, like in a butcher shop or something, or whatever. So anyway, I used that as kind of almost like a coming of age, like emerging from my father's childhood. So this room represents the back of the restaurant and him growing up, and then you walk through the curtain into these are more images. So again, I kept everything sort of on the floor, so more sort of like a child's level. So on the other side is almost like a restaurant kind of scenario. Like I had there were photographs of the Pheasant Cafe, which was one of my father's restaurants, and it was like all the photographs were taken in the 50s. So all the furniture was chrome and like vinyl and with crazy 50s patterns and stuff. So I actually had people in the community kind of loan their 50s chrome furniture because I didn't have any, of course. And that became part of the installation. And there's the yellow lanterns have a watermark logo of my father's name with images of food. So there's a lot of food images. This was an apron that I made, and I used sugar beets to embed into the pulp when I made it. So the beets sort of bled out. And this is kind of a reference to when I was a child. My father tried to force me to start working at the restaurant, and I hated it. And we would be in the basement, like butchering meat and stuff, and I absolutely had this image like engraved on my mind of my father's bloody apron. So they grow sugar and process sugar beets in Fargo. So all those illusions kind of, came together in the show. And I had them build this counter that's illuminated from below, and I had cast these platters. So I used, like in a fast food Chinese takeout place, there's all these illuminated images of food. So I bought a bunch of those, and I cut them out, and I embedded them in the abaca when I cast it, these platters. I took Chinese takeout cartons, and I flattened them out and embossed them on abaca and just let the abaca dry on it, so you could see the impression of and then I cut it out and reconstructed, but also embedded food material that I bought, like dried food material that I bought in Chinatown. Actually, those are the matches from the pheasant and another one of my father's, which was called Phil Wong's restaurant. And then you can see like images from my mother's or my parents' photo album. And above is a piece I did called Migration, which is in a way a representation of the Chinese diaspora. And the pheasants, again, is a reference to the Pheasant Cafe, because there was actually these stuffed pheasants that were on the wall. So I kind of grew up probably in the Pheasant Cafe when I was a kid. So all these images really kind of were embedded in my brain. And that's like the logo on the Fargo theater, movie theater, with my father's, again, name above it on the wall. And my father and my mother below it. That's it.